Hello, welcome today. This is Awaken to Truth, and I am Michael Smith. Thank you for taking the time to watch, or if you are just in an audio format by podcast, thank you for listening. And if you like the video, please hit the thumbs up. If you don't like it, hit the thumbs down. If you love it, I would ask you to please hit that red subscribe button. All right, let's get into it today. There was obviously a big announcement last night. Donald Trump fired his opening salvo for the 2024 election cycle. He announced relatively early here in late 2022. And for the next, for the next couple of years, we will be figuring out exactly how it's going to look leading into what likely will be a rematch of the 2020, which, of course, was Donald Trump versus Joe Biden. But I had said in the last video that I was a Trump Republican. I really am not a Republican, so to speak, in the sense that I was entering college in the year 2000 with the Bush-Gore election. Obviously, I was 18. I didn't vote in that. And I didn't vote in elections thereafter, other than in 2004. I did vote for George W. Bush over John Kerry. I felt, as time went on, I felt betrayed by George W. Bush and by the Republican Party. I also have never been a big fan of the Democrat Party. And so I just didn't vote for a few election cycles, or two election cycles, 2008 and 2012. I believe that I rightly discerned at that time that there wasn't much difference between John McCain or Barack Obama, and that there wasn't much difference between Mitt Romney or Barack Obama either. And I didn't vote either way. But I did vote for Trump in 16 and for 20. So I guess you could say I am that Trump Republican. The people that he brought into the party that previously were just kind of sitting out on the sidelines. And I mentioned that I was open to change in the Republican Party if Donald Trump did not have a message. Because 2020, he kind of floundered. Very difficult election cycle, probably the most difficult election cycle, certainly of this century and maybe of last century as well. An unprecedented event like COVID-19 and everything that went with that. It certainly was not a normal election cycle. But last night, from what I saw, I was extremely pleased with what Donald Trump laid forth. He seemed to be focused. He seemed to be on point once again. He seemed to once again have an agenda that he wanted to push. And it's very, very early. It's yet to be seen if he can stay disciplined enough to push that agenda throughout, the next couple of years and hammer it. It shouldn't be difficult. The country is not going well right now. The midterms didn't go extremely well for the Republicans. They also didn't go extremely bad. Nancy Pelosi was dismissed from her duties as Speaker of the House. The Republicans have officially won the House, not by as many seats as they anticipated, but yet they have won. And they won the popular vote by over 5 million, the midterm popular vote. I know that doesn't mean anything, but nevertheless, it does signify that possibly, the Democrats' best day was last Tuesday. I don't know for sure, but it is possible that is as good as it's going to get for them, staving off tremendous losses. There was some encouraging signs, like the state of New York, in literally every area of the state, except a tiny blue dot surrounding New York City, shifted significantly right. They shifted significantly to the Republicans in the way that they voted. They picked up several congressional seats there. Lee Zeldin did pretty well, considering he is a Republican running for statewide office in New York. And over 500,000 people fled from the state of New York due to the COVID authoritarian insanity. And while I don't at all, not understand why they did that. It's disappointing because if they would have stayed, they could have taken back the state from Kathy Hochul and from the Democrats. Instead, we had massive waves in states that it didn't really matter, like Florida and Texas and Tennessee, places where these New Yorkers scattered to try and get away from, what it is that they were having to endure. And I don't take that lightly. But all I'm saying is it shows us that if they would have stayed a little longer, they could have taken back their state instead of having to flee to another state. But back to the announcement of Trump, he was focused. He was on point. His tone was good. I know he's not going to keep that tone through the entire election. He's not capable of keeping that tone through the entire election. There's going to be times where he gears it up and he revs it up. That's fine. But if he can stay in that ballpark, he doesn't have to, he's going to take his, shots at people. That's just what he's going to do. Like it or don't like it, say he needs to change. He's not going to change. He's 75, 76 years old. That's not going to happen. He's not going to change at this point. But if he can at least kind of governor that a little bit and stay in the ballpark of where he was last night, he is not going to be beat in the Republican primary, and he'll be very difficult to beat in a national election after the United States gets 2 more years of a bellyful of Joe Biden and what the Democrats are bringing to the table. And so I was just listening and kind of writing down some things. And one thing that jumped out at me about his speech last night is that while I absolutely voted for him in 2020, 2020 was very different than 2016. In 2016, when he began to say some of the things that he said, I began to think for the first time in my lifetime that if he was somehow miraculously voted into the presidency, that there would be somebody sitting in that seat that was just different than anybody who had sat in that seat in my memory. Historically, I am, at least I guess you could say, an admirer of Ronald Reagan. I wasn't around enough to know really what it was like to live through those presidencies. I was a little kid. And so it's difficult for me to really contrast that. But from George H. Bush on, which is really the first president that I remember, I could certainly say that there was something different about Trump. And there was something that captivated the American hope in certain people, about half the country, that I didn't feel like any other candidate was necessarily able to do that was center right. Obama certainly captivated some of that from the center left. Obama in 2008, he was a populist. He campaigned as that, hope and change. He inspired that in some people. For Obama in 2008, I was a wait and see. I didn't buy it. I didn't necessarily dismiss it. I said, well, we'll wait and see and hope for the best. My pessimism, I believe, ended up, being proved to be valid. He did not govern as a populist. He governed much more so as a standard leftist Democrat. So much so that by the end of his reign, or by the end of his 2 terms, the big talking point was already starting to be this transgender nonsense. And that was just the opening door. It has gone from opening that door to trying to break that door down to now we're trying to, get as crazy as we can possibly get with that type of stuff. Trump is a stopgap to that. Trump is a wall to that. I'm not saying that he's the only one, not saying that DeSantis hasn't been good on some of that stuff too. I'm just saying I don't think anybody can throw down on it. I don't think anybody can stand up to it necessarily like Trump can. And that energy of 2015, of 2016 was, at least to a strong degree, back last night. He was once again the outsider. He was once again the populist, speaking to the population of the United States. It's us versus them. It's us versus the establishment. It's us versus the ruling class, where if your last name is Obama, Bush, McCain, Cheney, Gore, Biden, you're all in the same club. The Uniparty in Washington. He certainly presented himself as the alternative last night, once again, to the Uniparty in Washington. that if you want an outsider, if you want a seat at the table, if you want a seat at the table that you've not been invited to for so many years, but yet you've been asked and expected and demanded that you're going to foot the bill for the table, he is essentially, his message is, I'll give you a little seat at that table that you've never had. And I think that that is the appeal of Donald Trump. That is the power of his message. And that is why so many people feel a sense of hopefulness with him. Time will tell. I don't believe they're going to feel that same sense of hopefulness with Ron DeSantis if he decides to get into the ring. After last night, I'm no longer convinced he's going to make that decision to get in the ring. I think he'll look relatively small. I think he'll look relatively normal. And I think that we would find out, can he actually take the punches? And even if he can, I don't know that that's going to end up being a deciding factor for people, because in Trump, you have somebody that absolutely has proven they can take the punches. They have a jaw of steel. DeSantis, we're not sure. It's unknown. I'm not saying his time will never come. I'm not saying he's not a good guy. I'm not saying he isn't a good governor. He is. I lived in his state for a little over a year. He's done a great job. I'm not discounting that. I just don't think that it's necessarily he's going to be able to shine when the originator of what DeSantis has done is also running and is also standing there in the fight. That's my opinion. We'll see how it goes. But Trump certainly cast forth that vision, and he said some things. He took some subtle shots at climate change. He had a few little Trumpisms. He took some subtle shots at Biden, and he seemed to be, to me, he seemed to be that appealing outsider candidate again. And some people would say, how in the world could somebody who has served 4 years as president of the United States ever be able to campaign as a political outsider? If anybody can do it, I think Trump can. I think he's a once in a lifetime type. I think that he actually can pull it off because people have seen it's not just the vicious Democrats that don't want him. It is also the backstabbing establishment Republicans that don't want him. And so he actually can authentically campaign as an outsider against both of those, against the uniparty that is in Washington. And he comes off as Dave Chappelle kind of hit on this. I'm not going to really go over that, but been plenty of videos on YouTube. But in Dave Chappelle's SNL monologue, he kind of hit on the why people are able to buy Trump as authentic. And he essentially said he tells the truth on certain things. He tells the truth about what goes on behind the scenes. And a great example of that, Chappelle gave his example. You can look it up. All you got to do is search for it, and you'll find the monologue if you haven't heard it already. But another example of that with a politician that I actually like, Rand Paul, back in 2015 when they were debating. I like Rand Paul. I liked Rand Paul's dad, Ron, back in 2008. A guy the establishment threw to the side. They did not want Ron Paul having a voice. Ron Paul, kind of a populist libertarian. And Rand, who was really, I think, by nature in that vein, but he's had to kind of modify it in order to win a place at the Republican table. But he's still a guy that I like. And so Rand Paul, I remember he went after Trump in 2015, and he said, you're part of the problem, Mr. Trump. You're the one that you buy influence. You want to pay off politicians to do your bidding. And Trump looks at him and says, yeah, I do. You came in my office and you begged for money and I wrote you a big check and you've done whatever I've asked you to ever since. And Rand Paul was immediately shut down. Trump essentially was saying the system has been rigged and I use the rigged system to my benefit. And that resonated with people because it communicated something to people that no policy can communicate. It communicated something to people that, no brand of conservatism could communicate. It communicated something to people deep on the inner level, and it was able to articulate, and Donald Trump was not an articulate individual, but it was able to articulate something that people couldn't even put into words, but it's something that they felt. And the fact that he was able to tap into that makes him a extremely formidable opponent. And the fact that he was tapping into that again last night makes me believe that, there's a long way to go, but he's going to be a very difficult opponent for anybody on the Republican side. And should he end up winning, and should he end up going on to the general, it's going to be a very interesting match between him and, I believe, Joe Biden is going to run once again for the Democrats. Why would Joe Biden run? Because in 2020, they found the formula. They sat him in the basement and they won. In 2022, Fetterman, senator-elect from the state of Pennsylvania, had a health issue. I'm not diminishing his health issue. He had a stroke. I feel bad for him as a person because he had a stroke. I despise the man's politics. He didn't campaign. He actually debated, and he can't talk. And the voters of Pennsylvania saw for themselves he can't speak. He can't form thoughts. He is cognitively diminished and damaged due to the stroke. And they voted him into office. So the Democrats now believe that they can get whoever they want into office. And they did it once with Joe Biden. And as long as he's still alive, and as long as they can prop him up and campaign him from his house in Delaware or from the depths of somewhere in the White House, they'll do it again. And it'll be interesting to see how that goes. But there's a long way to go for both of those guys. Neither one of those guys are extremely young. Both of those guys, anything could happen in the next 2 years. You never know. But based on what I saw last night, I saw a Donald Trump that had his mojo back. I saw a Donald Trump that was on message and on point. And I saw a Donald Trump that is going to strike fear into the Republican establishment that has raised billions using his name and has been clamoring to throw him aside and move on to somebody else. And that's another issue that I think Ron DeSantis is going to have. The same money that backed Bush, the same money that backed Romney, the same money that backed Jeb Bush in 2015, that money is knocking at DeSantis's door. And it's going to be difficult for DeSantis to appeal. I'm not blaming him for that. He's a young guy. He doesn't have the kind of money and nationwide support to be able to put up an effective campaign without that type of donor class. So I'm not necessarily blaming him, but it's going to be a big challenge for him to be able to gain the Trumpian vote, which is the more grassroots, populist level, more establishment resistant wing of the conservative movement. He's going to have a hard time getting that vote whilst taking money from the people that sector of the party absolutely despises. But again, a long way to go. This is just the beginning. It'll be an interesting ride. There's a lot to talk about, in just the current events and politically speaking and, many other things right now. And I'll be back with some other videos soon. But as for today, that is all I have to say about the 2024 opening shots that were fired by Donald Trump. And we'll stay tuned. It'll be fun to watch. And if you're giving up out there, and if you're saying, you know what, I think it's over, that's not a great attitude. It's never over till it's over. Don't be demoralized. That's the purpose. That's the point. You are intended to be demoralized, but if you will refuse to be demoralized, you absolutely, your voice can be heard and you can win. God bless you. Thank you for taking the time to watch. I'll be back soon. And that is all for today.